The rain hammered against the windshield of a silver sedan parked at the far edge of a near-empty grocery store lot, and inside that car, curled beneath a thin blazer that did nothing to fight off the cold, slept a woman the world would later recognize as one of the most powerful executives in the state. But at 3 in the morning, she was just a stranger, shivering, broken, and utterly alone. Marcus Webb noticed the car only because his daughter's medicine had run out an hour earlier than the pharmacy's restock, and he'd driven across town in desperation. His 4-year-old daughter Nadia buckled into the back seat, flushed with fever, her small voice asking again and again when they'd get home. As he pulled into the lot, his headlights swept across the sedan, illuminating a woman's face pressed against the cold glass of the driver's window, and something in his chest tightened. He almost drove past. He told himself it wasn't his business. But the rain was relentless, and the woman hadn't moved, and a father who'd spent the last 2 years learning what it meant to protect the vulnerable couldn't simply look away. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in moments that quietly change 2 lives forever, give this video a like, drop a comment below, share it with someone who needs reminding that good still exists, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House so you never miss a story like this one. Marcus parked beside her, told Nadia to stay buckled, and stepped into the rain. He knocked gently on the window. The woman startled awake, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from sleeping somewhere you were never supposed to be vulnerable. She rolled the window down only an inch, enough to speak, not enough to be reached. Her voice was hoarse when she told him she was fine, that she'd just pulled over to rest, that he should go. But Marcus had seen enough exhaustion in his own mirror over the past 2 years to recognize when someone was lying to protect what little dignity they had left. Her name, she eventually admitted, was Renata Calloway, though she said it the way someone admits to a wound rather than introduces themselves. She didn't say more than that. Marcus didn't push. Instead, he did something that surprised them both. He offered her the blanket Nadia kept in the back seat for emergencies, the one with cartoon foxes on it, slightly too small for an adult but warm nonetheless. Renata stared at it like it was the strangest, kindest thing anyone had done for her in months. She took it. She didn't explain herself, and Marcus didn't ask again. He simply told her there was a 24-hour diner 2 blocks down, that the coffee was bad but the soup was good, and that nobody there would ask her any questions she didn't want to answer. Then he drove away, glancing once in his rearview mirror at the woman now wrapped in a fox-patterned blanket in a grocery store parking lot, wondering if he'd ever know what brought her there. What Marcus didn't know was that 12 hours earlier, Renata Calloway had walked out of the headquarters of Callaway Reyes Industries, the company she had built from a single rented office into a name recognized across 3 states, after a boardroom confrontation that left her stripped of authority she didn't even realize she was vulnerable to losing. A hostile maneuver by her own co-founder, hidden behind months of quiet manipulation, had triggered an emergency vote that suspended her decision-making power pending an internal review. She'd been escorted out of her own building by security who wouldn't meet her eyes. Her phone had been flooded with messages she couldn't bring herself to answer. Her apartment, rented under the company's corporate account, had been quietly locked from remote access as part of the same review. She had nowhere to go that didn't feel like walking into a room full of people discussing her downfall, so she drove until exhaustion outran her pride, and she stopped in a grocery store parking lot because it was simply the first place that felt invisible enough to break down in peace. By morning, while Marcus was waking Nadia for her medicine and making sure her fever had dropped enough for daycare, Renata's name had become the loudest search across every department of Callaway Reyes Industries. Board members who had voted for her suspension were suddenly backpedaling as financial irregularities surfaced, irregularities that, once examined honestly, pointed not toward Renata's mismanagement but toward the very man who orchestrated her removal. Employees who adored her began organizing quietly, refusing to work under the interim leadership installed overnight. Her assistant, a sharp and devoted young man named Tobias Wren, had spent the entire night calling hospitals, family members, anyone who might know where she'd gone, terrified that the woman who built an empire with her bare hands and a stubborn belief in fairness had simply vanished into thin air. Renata, unaware of the storm gathering in her name, sat in the diner Marcus had mentioned, picking at a bowl of soup she didn't have the appetite for, staring at a phone she'd finally turned back on. Notifications flooded the screen, missed calls, frantic texts, a board statement she hadn't approved, and beneath all of it, a message from Tobias that simply read, "Please tell me you're safe. We need you. The company needs you. Don't let them win by disappearing." For the first time since the meeting that shattered her sense of control, Renata felt something other than despair crack through her numbness. It was the small, dangerous beginning of resolve. She returned to the same parking lot the next evening, not because she expected to see Marcus again, but because some part of her, lonely and raw, hoped to thank the stranger who had treated her like a person instead of a headline. And there he was, just as before, parked nearby with Nadia asleep in her car seat after another late errand run. Renata approached his window this time, the fox blanket folded neatly in her arms, and for the first time since the boardroom betrayal, she let herself speak honestly to another human being. She told him who she was. She told him what had happened. She told him she didn't know if she had anything left to fight for. Marcus listened without judgment, the way only someone who had rebuilt his own life from nothing could listen, and when she finished, he said something she would remember for the rest of her life, that the people who truly deserve power are the ones who remember what it feels like to have none. That night, something shifted in Renata. She didn't go home, she still didn't have one to return to, but she went to a small motel near the diner, sat at a flimsy desk under flickering light, and began writing. Not a resignation. Not a surrender. A plan. By morning, she walked into Callaway Reyes Industries not as a broken woman seeking pity, but as a founder reclaiming what was rightfully hers, armed with financial records Tobias had secretly preserved, employee testimonies that had been quietly gathering overnight, and a clarity that came only from touching rock bottom and choosing, deliberately, to rise. The boardroom that once stripped her of power watched in stunned silence as the same woman who'd vanished without explanation calmly dismantled the lies built against her, piece by piece, until the truth stood undeniable. By noon, the board reversed its decision. By evening, the man who orchestrated her downfall had resigned in disgrace. But the story didn't end in boardrooms or balance sheets. The first thing Renata did once her authority was restored was track down the man who had no idea his small kindness had become the turning point of her life. She arrived at Marcus's modest apartment with an offer he never expected, a stable position within her company's growing community outreach division, one that came with healthcare, flexibility for a single father, and most importantly, dignity. Marcus, stunned and humbled, almost refused out of pride, the same pride that had kept him surviving alone for 2 years. But Renata reminded him gently that accepting help didn't erase his strength, it simply gave him room to keep being strong for Nadia. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that kindness costs nothing but can change everything, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Months later, Renata stood at a charity gala hosted by her own company, watching Nadia twirl in a small dress across the ballroom floor while Marcus laughed nearby, no longer a man drowning quietly in exhaustion, but one finally given room to breathe. Renata often said, to anyone who asked how she rebuilt her empire after everything fell apart, that it wasn't strategy or ambition that saved her. It was a stranger in a parking lot who saw a person before he saw a problem. Before we go, I have one small request. If this story moved you even a little, please type, "I believe in kindness," in the comments below. It means more than you know, and it helps stories like this reach people who need them most. And so the story closes not with the triumph of a boardroom, but with the quiet truth that sometimes, the most powerful people in the room are simply the ones who never stopped seeing others as human, and sometimes, all it takes to change everything is one cold night, one fox-patterned blanket, and one person brave enough to knock on a stranger's window instead of driving away.